Good day guys. Today we are going to discuss about config maps in Kubernetes cluster. In that we are working in a DevOps infrastructure where the developers will create the containers and upload to the repository. At the same time, the operations team will download or pull this image to their Kubernetes cluster and deploy it. If you look at the image which is present in the repository, the developer might have updated the license or any other sensitive information. Anyone is having access to the particular repository, he can just like that pull that image and he can deploy it in his particular Kubernetes cluster and he can retrieve the data. So for avoiding that, we have a mechanism in place that is called ConfigMaps. In this ConfigMaps, what are the sensitive informations like a username, password, or any repository data or license keys, we will update it in the configmap files. And this particular configmap file resides in the Kubernetes cluster. A similar way, if a same configmap file, if it is present in the developer area as well, he can develop the code. The thing he needs to do is a bootable image or essential details only to be uploaded in the repository. The remaining things we will inject it to the pod while creating in the Kubernetes cluster. That's it about a config map, and we will understand much more while doing the labs. We are mainly discussing first is imperative method of creating the config map. Second is declarative way of creating the config map, and the third one is we will be updating this particular config map files into a pod and see what is happening there. Let's move on to the labs. This is basically our Kubernetes cluster. Let's understand that what are all the objects present in this cluster. kubectl get pods nodes. It's a 2-node cluster. Alright, now let's create a definition file via cname.yaml. Any name you can use it, it's not a big deal. Here it is API version is v1 and kind is configmap. Then metadata name is config, any name you can put it. Next is data. Data here we can put it as like username, it's like a root, anything we can mention it. Password root 123. Then let's say mention shell, bash. That's it. Now we are gonna create kubectl create -f cm.yaml. So kubectl get cm, what is that? Config is our config map name. So kubectl describe cm config. If you look at that, the parameters are mentioned here. The namespace, it is in default namespace. Labels, we haven't labeled anything. Data, what are all the details we have mentioned, everything will be here. So it would be in the key value pair format. So the password is root123, shell is bash, and username is root. That's it. Here events means if there is any specific information, warnings or any failure notice, everything will list at the events. Perfectly alright. We have created that. This is one method. This method is called declarative method. Alright, now we have the next method called imperative method. It is as simple as kubectl create configmap. We will mention configmap reference. Any name you can put, there is no thumb rule in that. Okay, here let's come here and inject the data from -- from literal. From literal means if we will be giving in the form of key value pair format. It is as simple as username equal to root, then again -- from literal equal to password equal to root 123, again -- from literal equal to shell equal to bash. That's it. So we have created configmap reference file. So this is another configmap, right? kubectl get cm configmap. So we have two configmap, and we have one more method of imperative way of ref.txt. I mean reference.txt. Username root, password qrt, shell C shell. Alright, any values, no matter, it should be in the form of key value pair format. That's it. Now kubectl create cm for config map, then config map name. Now we will mention that cm ref cm, any name. Just let's stop it because it will be fit into the window. From -file equal to ref.txt. I mean the file which we have mentioned here, right? So that also created. Now kubectl get cm. We have three config map files which we have created. One is declarative method and the two are imperative method of config map creation. Perfectly alright. Now we will mount it in the pod and we will test it. How is it working? For that we have to create a file called pod.yaml. So here API version is v1, kind is pod, metadata is name, conf-pod, any name we can mention it, it's not a big deal here. So spec is containers, here -name nginx, we will create it with the nginx. Here the image is nginx, and we have to define, this time we will define the config map as environment variables. So in this case, first if it is a variable we have to mention any name because we have to call it right. So for that I will mention that shell underscore value, any name, not a big deal. So we have mentioned that. Next is value from where are we gonna pick it, right? So value from, we are gonna pick the value from config map key reference, right? We are gonna pick it from config map key reference file. So what is the name of that particular file? So name is called config. And what is the key which we need to pull it? So the key which we are going to pull is shell. So the key value pair, right? Since I mentioned the key here, the environment variable will print the value of that particular key. So here it is, key is shell. Everything has been completed now. Let's save it. Let's create the pod. kubectl create -f pod.yaml. Amazing. So kubectl exec conf -pod -it for interactive terminal -- space sh. Now let's see env. So the environment, we saw that the shell value is bash, remaining nothing is present, the other things, right? So we have extracted that particular value from the configmap reference file, because their username is there, password is there. That is not required. Similar way, if we have a 10 ports and the 10 ports, each port is having separate value required, we have to do this way. We can set it as an environment so that the necessary values only it will be pick it. From there it can call it and it can use it. That is method 1. Now let's exit from here. Let's go to other method. I'm using the same port file. Here I will change only one file. Here it is. I want everything. In that case, what I will do? Very simple. It is straightforward. I have to mention only env from environment from where. I'll mention that config map reference. What is that? You have to mention the name, that is config. In the containers parameter, global parameters, we have mentioned env from. So from where our environment should come? So config, it should come from the config map reference. So what is the config map reference? Config map reference name is config, which we have already created. So if something else is there, some other config map file is there, very well we can mention that file. Let's create the config map. Let's create the pod and understand that whether the config map values has already been injected to the pod. kubectl create -f pod.yaml. It has been created. Now we will go back to the previous command, which we tried to log into the shell. df-hp. Yes, it has been created now. env. Guys, if you look at here, it is username is root, and if we come to the password is root123, and the shell is bash. So all the parameters has already been injected to the environment variable of this particular pod. So the second method also covered. Now how do we mount it? Using the volume. Let's go to the pod definition file here, pod.yaml. Here we will come and just like that remove the entries. We have removed the environment variables from this particular file, and we will update the next parameters like the volume mounts. So volume mounts, the method is something different, right? So here we have to name it like config map, any name. There is no specific thumb rule for this. So mount path, we can mention config map. any mount path we can define it. So kindly check the previous videos if you have any doubt how do we mount the volume mounts and all the Kubernetes in a file system in a Kubernetes. So here we have another parameters called we will mention the volumes here. So the volumes here, it is name, it is again config map, and we have to mention that config map, and here it is again the name config. So guys, don't get confused here. The volume mounts which I mentioned here, it is config map, and the same name should I mention here, then only this will couple together and we would be able to access the parameters. And the config map, from where do we need to mount it? So it has to be mounted from the config map, and here it is the name of the actual config map name. So our config map name is config. Alright, so everything set. Let's create the pod and see what's happening. kubectl create -f pod.yaml. Perfectly fine. Let's go back to the command and see whether the particular parameters has already been mapped with the pod. gef -hp. Alright, it is present /config map ls. We are at /config map, and there is password, shell, and username is present. So let's see cat shell, what's the value, --cat username, what's the value, root, cat password, what's the value, cat password. That's root 123. So our particular parameters has already been updated here, and the config map is working as expected. Hope you guys understood in a better way. In the very next video we will come up with the secrets. It is very similar to the config map, and a slight couple more steps we have to update it to create a secret. So we will discuss more in the very next video. Have a great day. Bye bye.